Brothers and sisters, morning to you all. Today we are reading from Judges chapter 2. We have Pastor Joshua sharing. We have started on the book of Judges this week. What is God telling us through this? We are to welcome a new year ahead. Finally, the difficult year 2020 is over. But in year 2020, we really experienced the presence of God. The whole earth lies under the attack and the ravaging of the plague. Everywhere is affected, is struggling. But I'm most thankful during this difficult time, God really protects us. We continue to grow because we are full of the presence of God is strong among us. That's why, in conclusion, concluding 2020, the days are hard and yet the time goes past quickly. God is raising us up. That's my feeling. And we have experienced a lot. We must give thanks to God for this. So, with this backdrop, we go into the book of Judges. The last week of 2020, we are reading the book of Judges. What is the book of Judges trying to tell us? We go back to chapter 1. We read yesterday. Chapter 1. Judges chapter 1. The land of Canaan. The overall situation of the land of Canaan and also the 12 tribes of Israel. After the death of Joshua, that's verse 1. Verse 1, now after the death of the Joshua, how was the 12 tribes of Israel doing in the land of Canaan? First of all, Judah was mentioned, the tribe of Judah. And there are 3 areas mentioned. The first one, Judah. I wasn't here for the morning devotion yesterday. But as I read back, and then I want to do some supplementary information. Were they successful in possessing the land, the 12 tribes? Did they really possess the land promised by God? Did they, the promise of God, did it come to pass in their lives? I will put it quite a short one. 3 areas. Judah, 90% successful. The success rate of Judah was 90%. Or he possessed 90% of the promised land. Verse 1 to verse 21. Verse 1 to 21. That's the tribe of Judah possessing 90% of the promised land. And how about the house of Joseph? They were not successful. I wouldn't consider them successful. Verse 22 to 26. 22 to 26, house of Joshua. And then verse 35, talk about the house of Joseph. And mainly is Ephraim that we mentioned in the house of, among the house of Joseph. Ephraim was not considered to be successful. They gained the city of Luz, but they were not considered successful. They were not considered successful. But compared to other tribes, it's better. The northern tribes, the tribes in the northern part, all failed. The tribes in the northern part were all failed. The success rate success rate, house of Judah 90%, and then house of Joseph 50% success rate. And for others tribes, they all failed. The northern Manasseh, in the north part, Manasseh, and verse 29, also Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites. They were not successful because they did not drive out the Canaanites who dwelt in Giza, so the Canaanites dwelt in Giza among them. Verse 29 of chapter 1. And then Zebulun, and then Asaph, and Naphtali, and also Dan. The tribe of Dan was even bullied by Amorites. That's verse 34. The tribes in the northern part failed. They all failed. It did not record what land they possessed. We just recorded. The Bible tells us what they failed to gain. That's why. So that's the understanding I have on the book of Judges chapter 1. That's the beginning of the book of Judges. Verse 1, after the death of Joshua, it happened. So Judah went up to fight against the Canaanites. So basically, God really approved house of Judah. Towards the house of Joseph, it was just 50%. But to all others, God did not approve them because they did not gain any land. They did not possess any land. They all failed. Why would that happen? That's why we have chapter 2. Why? Why? Why did that happen? Chapter 1 tells us the situation, the setting of the book of Judges, the time of Judges, what happened, the backdrop of it, the setting of the book of Judges. So the whole overall situation was that house of Judah did possess 90%. In the time of Judges, in that generation, the house of Judah did possess a little bit of their land. House of Joseph, they only gained half. And for all others, they all failed. That's the overall setting of it. But why would they end up like that? The promise of God given to the Israelites wasn't fulfilled. Why? The promise of God to Moses, the promise of God towards Joshua, God promised Joshua that no one may stand against you. The land that Joshua was bringing the whole Israelites to possess, from north to the Hamath, Euphrates River, all the way to the south. That's the Wadi of Egypt. From where the sun sets to where the sun rises to where the sun sets, I will give you. What happened to God's promise to Joshua? What happened to it? Now Joshua died. They did not possess fully the land given by God, promised by God. What happened to the promise of God? What went wrong? What went wrong? So here, the house of Judah possessed 90% of the land. House of Joseph only half the land. And the tribe in the northern part all failed. Not to mention about the Euphrates, not the north part. They couldn't even possess the land in the land of Canaan. They suffered, they struggled. What went wrong? Has God changed? Changed his mind? Chapter 2 tells us the setting, the reason. Basically, chapter 1 and 2 of the book of Judges tells us the overall situation in the time of Judges. Besides house of Judah, basically, all other tribes failed. Why did that happen? The title of chapter 2 is Do Not Be the Generation That Forsakes God. We're trying to positive perspectives. From the lessons in chapter 2, we learn that we should not be the generation that forsakes God. On the positive note, we must choose to follow God. That's the positive note. So remember to watch my, series of following God. Today I talk about this. It's very special. Now, after this, I will film episodes 40th of Following God. Starting from the beginning of this year, every week I film one episode. Now I'm on the 40th episode this week. How special! 40th episode today. Now it's the last week of 2020, and I'm filming the 40th episode. 40 means one generation. Number 40. What a coincidence! What a timing! Wow! Goosebumps. It gives me goosebumps. I'm standing in awe of God. That I myself, I'm filming this series. I am walking in the heart of God, in the leading of God. Now I'm on the 40th episode. The whole series is named Following God. God wants us, the whole generation, to follow Him. Every generation is to follow God. Today, the title is Do Not Be the Generation That Forsakes God. So we must choose to follow God. Be the generation that follow God. Two coincidences which are quite impossible. The two coincidences, I film a Following God, and then at the end of this year, there's the 40th episode. What a timing! 40th episodes. So 40 means one generation. The end of one generation, the beginning of a new generation. What a coincidence. How can that be? God is real. God is truly leading us. This coincidence is just too coincidence. Too much of a coincidence. I have served God for a long time, starting from 1989 when I served in Vancouver, in Canada. Now I have been serving God 20 years in Hong Kong. All these years, over 30 years, at least 30 years. I have never filmed any like this video, only starting this year. And now this week, the 40th episode, another coincidence. Today, the title is Do Not Be the Generation That Forsakes God. And in the afternoon, I will film after this. And on the positive note, we must follow God. Put it simple. Follow God. That's following God. What a coincidence! I only want to say to God, oh God, I thank you. You are truly with us in our midst. Brothers and sisters, we must follow God closely. God really, really cares about us, cares a lot. The most important message in both the New Testament and the Old Testament is that we are to follow God. The Israelites faced a decision to make when they recall the history of the book of Judges, is to tell us the message. Oh Israel, you must make that decision, choice. Make that choice. Choose to follow God. Chapter 1 tells us the overall situation of 12 tribes. In general, besides the house of Judah, all other tribes failed to possess the land. The second chapter 2 tells us the reason. The reason is they did not follow God. It's divided into 4 paragraphs of chapter 2. They did not follow God at the time. The first subheading, Bokim generation. Bokim means whipping, means whippers. The whipping generation is describing the time of Judges. They were whipping. They were struggling. It was a hard time for them. It's quite a negative title. I was thinking about Bokim generation for this title, for this chapter. But or positive notes is do not be a whipping generation. Or verse 1 to 5, that's the first paragraph of chapter 2. Then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bokim and said, I led you up from Egypt and brought you to the land of which I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. Verse 2, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. You shall tear down your altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Verse 1 to 2. Do not miss out verse 1 here. Then the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bokim. This sentence, this line is important. The first one, the angel of the Lord, is God himself or God's representative. When Joshua was to attack Jericho, the angel of the Lord appeared to Joshua. That's the Holy Spirit. And here, the angel of the Lord appeared again. Came up from Gilgal to Bokim. We know about where Gilgal is, but we don't know where Bokim was. It was a known place to us. But we know where Gilgal was. Gilgal is where Joshua kept seeking God. God appeared to Joshua in Gilgal. That's where Joshua served God, worshiped God. Every time Joshua will return to Gilgal. But now, the angel of the Lord appeared. He came up from Gilgal to an unknown place. Gilgal had been deserted. No one, they did not gather again at Gilgal. Gilgal was a ruin. They did not serve God anymore. And God will go up to find the Israelites. He went up to an unknown place. So that means Bokim was where Israelites gather. Somewhere it's not the place of God, just a random place chosen by man. Today we had no idea Bokim became an unknown place. But we know that Bokim meant whipping. They were whipping, they were grieving. They gathered together. But they did not gather together to seek God. No. But God came and sought them out, spoke to them. Why did that happen? I will come back here. Why did that happen? Verse 3, therefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be thrones in your sight, and their gods shall be a snare to you. Verse 4, so it was when the angel of the Lord spoke this word to all the children of Israel, then the people lifted up their voices and wept. Then they called the name of the place Bokim. And they brought sacrifice to the Lord there. This place was called Bokim, whipping. You did not listen to me. That's what God said. You did not tear down the altars of other gods. You make covenant with them. Now I do not drive them out before you anymore. You serve them, they shall be thrones in your sight and a snare to you. That's why the people were whipping loud there. And they sacrificed to God. That's the whole generation, what their generation was like. A whipping generation. A generation that forsook God. Now we are on verse second paragraph. Verse 6 to 10. Verse 6 to 10. The generation that forsook God, that's another generation. The generation of Joshua passed. Another generation arose. Verse to 10. Another generation. This is called another generation. Verse 10. Verse 6 is said here, Joshua had dismissed the people. The children of Israel went each to his own inheritance to possess the land. So the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elder who outlived Joshua. Verse 7. Now Joshua, the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died when he was 110 years old. Verse 8. Verse 9, and they buried him within the borders of his inheritance at Timoth Heres in the mountains of Ephraim on the north side of Mount Gash. Verse 10, when all that generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation arose after them who did not know the Lord nor the work which he had done for Israel. Verse 10. Another generation. Another generation arose who did not know the Lord nor the work which he had done for generation. My children, do not be Bokim generation. We were in whipping, in grief, hopeless. Now we are in pandemic. We do not be Bokim generation. Why were they a Bokim generation? Because they are another generation. They did not know God. They did not know the work of the work of God had done for Israel. starting from the book of Judges to the end of Judges, the whole generation was like that. Another generation. They are not godly generation. They did not belong to the Lord. They did not know the Lord was God. When we read the Ten Commandments, verse 2 and 3 talk about the Ten Commandments. God made covenant with them. Ever since the creation of the world, God had been with them and God had been leading them. There exists no other God before God. But now come to the time of Judges, they did not know that the Lord was God. They did not know the name of the Lord. They did not serve Him, did not obey Him. They served other gods, idols. Now we go back to first paragraph of this chapter. Maybe at Bokim they were worshipping and serving other gods. It's possible. The angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bokim. Came up from Gilgal to Bokim and appeared to them. They didn't know. They did not know God. But God spoke to them in a majestic way there. Oh, that's why it says the angel of the Lord. That's why everyone was weeping. And they sacrificed to the Lord. But did they forsake? Did they turn away from their idols and return to God? They did not. They sacrificed to the Lord and yet they continue to worship other gods, other idols. It's such a sad thing. They became another generation. Brothers and sisters, God is reminding us today. Do not become a Bokim generation. Do not become another generation. Generation that do not know God. Today, God has been blessing us. How about our next generations? If I'm not here anymore, our curator staff will still survive, and all the co-workers here, you arise and then lead the situation. We continue to nurture the presence of God. But how about when we all pass away, our next generation? Do they become another generation? Today we must lead, guide, and teach and pass on what God has given us to our next generation. Verse 11 to 15. They did not stand before God, the generation who did not stand before their enemies. I want to use this because God told Joshua that no one may stand before you. When they leave God, forsake God, is that the Israelites could not stand before their enemies. That's Joshua chapter 1, verse 5. Today, God has given us a lot of promises, but if we do not follow God, we cannot stand before our enemies. Verse 11 to 15, the third paragraph. With verse 14, they forsook the Lord and served Baals and the Ashtaroth. Verse 13. And the anger of the Lord was hot against them, so he delivered them into the hands of the plunderers who despoiled them, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Verse 14, the last line of verse 14. They could no longer stand before their enemies. They could no longer stand before their enemies. Verse 15, wherever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for calamity. That's even more sad. And they were greatly distressed. Verse 15. Greatly distressed. Today we reflect on our own lives. During the pandemic, how was your situation? In these financial difficulties, how are you doing? How are your finance doing? Brothers and sisters, do not be rational. Do not think that, oh, I'm struggling, I'm in distress today. Or I'm in misery. Oh, I can't do nothing about it. That's the overall situation. It's too rational thinking. Oh, yes, of course, the whole overall generation may put us in such difficulties. But what about our faith? About the presence of God? During the attack from the enemy, God's presence is with us. He will protect us. How come we do not have the protection of God? Or the presence, the protection of God was just half, just like the house of Ephraim, or just like other tribes, failed totally. In this distress, we could be like a house of Judah, possessed, yes, in difficulties, but 90% success rate. Why? Why do we not enjoy? Why do we not? Do not be too rational, and then put it to the general situation. We must listen to God. Do you follow God? Reflect on this. Do you follow God? Do you stand before your enemy? Are you able to? Not just the circumstances, not just the one factor. God is the defining factor. Last paragraph, 16 to 23. Last paragraph. When judges, even with judges, the generation that did not obey God despite judges, the generation that did more evil, I will put it as a simple, even though judges were raised up, they were delivered. But when judges died, the time of judges passed, they did even more evil than before. For example, they worshipped 5 idols before. Take example. They were in distress. God raised up a judge and delivered them. So they were relieved. They listened to the judge for a period of time, but they did not really listen to the judges. They did not do everything the judges required. When the judges passed away, they bounced back. Then they worship at least 10 idols and sacrifice more to the idols. They forgot God totally. That's the generation in the time of judges. That's what happened in general. That's the same for our generation. When we ask why the promise of God to Joshua was not fulfilled 100%, verse 22 and 23, so that through them I may test Israel, whether they will keep the ways of the Lord to walk in them as their father kept them or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out immediately, nor did he deliver them into the hands of Joshua. Verse 22 and 23. The Israelites did not receive fully the God's promised land. God did not deliver the whole land to them, so that God knows whether they will follow him or not. But they really did not obey God. When Joshua passed away, after Joshua passed away, all the elders who outlived Joshua also died. They became Bokim generation. They became another generation. The generation that could no longer stand before their enemies. The generation who did even more evil. Brothers and sisters, coming to the end of this year, the new year shall start very soon. I have filmed 40 episodes of Following God. How many episodes have you watched? How much do you follow God? I truly believe the more you follow God, the more blessed you will be. If you do not know God, your days will be more bokim, more whipping. Your heart does not know God. If that's the case, you can no longer stand before your own enemies. You will face a lot of calamity. God wants to know your heart. Do not be the generation that does more evil. That's what's happening to the world. The world is doing more and more evil, more violence. The wicked men are being more and more wicked. The virus is getting stronger and stronger. They have more and more mutant strains. How do we face all this? Follow God. Do not be the generation who forsakes God. God will protect you. In the new year, it's starting very soon. We must embrace the presence of God. Listen to God. Obey His words. The blessing of God shall overtake you. Do not let calamity overtake you. When you follow God, blessings will follow you. May God bless you. That's the end of the message today.